Good afternoon. This is the Salina City Planning Commission. It's good to see all of you today. We're going to start our meeting today with approval of minutes from our last meeting.
I forgot to grab it.
Move to approve.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve last meeting's minutes. All those in favor vote aye, please.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Bringing us to new business, tonight we have a couple of public hearing items. Our first is a quasi-judicial matter, number 3.1, application M19-10, filed by Mr. Bachta, requesting a change in the official street name of Coachlight Lane, which extends from North 9th Street to Bachta Court.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a application that's been filed by Mr. Hasu Bachta and Mr. Roger Bachta, and they are owners of property that currently fronts on Coachlight Lane. And just to give you some background information on how street names get established, they're usually established through the plating process. And so when you see a subdivision plat that comes before you, that developer is putting forth names of streets on that plat, and we review that first and foremost as a staff, and then it comes to you as well to be reviewed as part of the plat. And what we try to avoid is we want to make sure that names of streets are sufficiently different in sound and in spelling from other street names in the city so as not to cause confusion. A street which is or is planned as a continuation of an existing street shall bear the same name. So we wouldn't want a street like Roach or Highland or something like that you go from subdivision to subdivision and it has a different name in each subdivision. So if somebody is doing a subdivision, they're continuing a street, we try to make sure that street name continues. And so once the subdivision plat gets approved and recorded, the street names on that plat become the official street names, and then those get put on the city's official street map. The name is used for addressing for things like water service, gas and electric service, emergency service response, and mail delivery. And so once a particular street or segment of a street is constructed, a street sign identifying that street is installed by the street department at the city's expense. This particular street that we're talking about was named outside that normal street naming process. There was actually a separate ordinance that was adopted in 1982, approved by the City Commission at the time that it was accepted as a public street. And the reason for that is that when that subdivision was first approved, the name Coachlight did not appear on the plat because that was not considered a street. And as to an existing street, there's three ways that a change can be initiated. The subdivision developer, an abutting owner or resident of a particular street may petition the City Commission to change the name of a street. We had a situation here where there was a street that I think it had 5 residences on it. It was called Etherington Court, and Mr. Etherington had kind of a checkered career as a developer, and the people living on the street didn't want to live on Etherington Court, so they petitioned to change the name of the street, and it was changed to Golf View, and that was initiated by the residents who lived there. The Planning Commission or City Commission could initiate a street name change if they thought it was in the public interest, or a city department such as police or fire. We had a situation where a street on the east side of town was half a street, but it was named Noble Drive, and the fire department determined later that there was an existing Noble Court way on the west side of town, and so the fire department initiated a change to that street name, and it changed to Greystone, and Greystone it is today. So this particular request was initiated by owners who own property along that street. And we've given you kind of a timeline and the history of how Coach Light Lane came into being. It originally was built as a frontage road that provided access to a farmhouse that was cut off by I-70. It was originally just a KDOT frontage road, and then there was a plat approved by the City Planning Commission in 1973, and that was a 3-lot plat on the south side of Coach Light Lane. John, do you have that paper map that shows the platting and all of that? So this is what the Interstate District southwest of I-70 looks like, and there is Coach Light Lane at the north end. There were motels and restaurant buildings built on the property in the 1970s, and the last new construction there was in 1982, and at that time the owners of that property petitioned to create a benefit district for paving upgrades to make the KDOT frontage road into a public street. That was done, and the City Commission approved an ordinance naming the road Coach Light Lane because it provided access to the Coach Light Inn and restaurant. In 1985, there was a petition filed requesting that the name Coach Light Lane be changed to Ramada Drive. The Planning Commission at that time voted to recommend that the petition be denied, and the City Commission concurred with that request. As I looked through the minutes and discussion on that, seemed to focus on the fact that the city couldn't go in and change street names every time a particular motel rebranded or a business rebranded, so they left it as Coach Light Lane. In this case, city staff reached out and contacted Mr. Hasu Bhakta, who is building the Comfort Inn and Suites that's under construction and actually had a occupancy inspection today. And we contacted about changing their address from North 9th Street to Coach Light Lane because they don't really have any frontage on and it's not really visible from North 9th Street. And we believe that it would assist travelers and emergency responders in locating the hotel if it was addressed off the street that it faces. And so Mr. Bhakta responded to that, said he was open to the address change, but he inquired about whether the name of the street could be changed. So we explained the street name change process. Mr. Bhakta contacted Mr. Roger Bhakta, who owns the 6 acres at the west end of the street and is in the process of trying to develop that. He was supportive of a name change, and they have jointly filed an application to change the name from Coach Light Lane to Bhakta Court. So the existing Coach Light Lane is not a street name that is similar sounding or conflicts with any other, so there's not a public safety reason to change it because it is in conflict. We also don't believe that the proposed name change would impact public safety response to the property. It might be a little more difficult to spell for some than Coach Light Lane, but it does not sound like or is not similar in spelling to another street name in the city. When we change the name of a street, the primary impact is on the existing owners of property that front on that street. And so we have notified all the potential owners. There is an owner of an unplatted tract at North 9th and Coach Light, but that property is addressed off 9th Street presently, and that probably would not change. So the only affected parties in this case would be Mr. Bhakta and Mr. Bhakta. So if you don't receive any objections to the street name change at the hearing and you're supportive of their request, you could recommend that the City Commission adopt a motion or adopt a resolution officially changing the name of Coach Light Lane to Bhakta Court. So with that, I'd be open to any questions that you have. Mr. Roger Bakhta is here as well if you have any questions of him. But this is being essentially requested by the owners of all the property who are potentially affected by the change.
Thank you, Mr. Andrew. Are there questions? Mr.
Yes,
Baca?
essentially, it's a driveway for the business, and could it be vacated as a city street and be turned into a driveway?
If it were vacated, then none of these properties would have any frontage on or access to a public street. So my answer to that would be no. That's why it was created as a public street in the first place in 1982, so that these properties would have frontage and access to a public street.
Any other questions? Mr. Bakhta? Do you want to speak? No. Okay. Does anyone have questions for Mr. Bakhta? No? Anyone in the public want to speak on this? No? Commissioners?
Who would pay for the street signs, the new street signs?
If the name is changed, the city would be responsible for getting the signs made and placing those out there. That was most recently done. The Salina Airport Authority came to the Planning Commission with a request to change a number of names out in the airport area, and Bailey Road was essentially ran from Centennial to the terminal building, was renamed to Arnold Avenue, and the city had those signs made and had them posted out there once the name change became official.
Other discussion? A motion?
I really don't have a feeling one way or the other.
Yeah, I'm not
I think
opposed.
it's neither here nor there.
Yeah.
So I move that we recommend to the city commission that a resolution be approved, officially changing the name of Coachlight Lane to Bakhta Court.
Do I have a second? Second. And who would be the second? Mr. Likwitz? It's been moved and seconded to approve the change or recommend this to the city commission. All those in favor vote aye, please. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Bakhta. Mr. Bakhta? Both of you?
That will go on to the city commission, and they'll take that up, and we'll notify you of that date.
This brings us to legislative matters for the evening. We have two. Number 3.2 is application Z19-5A, which is filed by the Salina City Planning Commission, requesting amendments of sign regulations to clarify what types of signs are and what types are not allowed to be located in public right-of-way, and amendment Article 14 of the Salina zoning ordinance definitions by adding a definition for government sign. This is continued from August 20th.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is continued over, and at your meeting on the 20th, we reported to you that the city attorney provided the linkage between this particular text amendment and an amendment, potential amendment to Section 42508, our temporary signs provision. And so in 2015, there was legislation passed by the Kansas legislature, which on a statewide basis limited the authority of cities in terms of regulating temporary signs or temporary yard signs during election season. And that legislation allowed those signs to be placed in the right-of-way during election season. And so Section 8 of this draft text amendment addresses this by providing an exception to the general prohibition on placing temporary signs in the public right-of-way. The other aspect of this, and John, do we have this draft text amendment, which is in, it looks like this is in the packet. I'll be able to display that. So we'll have to blow that up. The two items that we're focusing on here are exception 8, and you'll have to slide that over, John, so we can see it. Exception 8 and 9. So you can see this has some strike-throughs and blanks, and so the final wording of this is going to be dependent a little bit on the final wording of the text amendment in our next item. And then the other section that still needs a little more fleshing out and information for us to provide to you deals with signage that is authorized by the city to be affixed on bus benches and bus shelters. And the way that we have this set up as a draft is that those signs would be limited to those zoning districts that we have identified there. One of the things that we discussed and met before the meeting with representatives of OCCK is that we would like to try to get to you an inventory of the existing bus bench signs and then match those up with the zoning district in which they are located, because we didn't want to have you recommend any action on something that might have the inadvertent result of prohibiting a bus bench sign that might already be up. So the two options for wording on number 9 there would be to allow signs to be placed on bus benches or shelters in any zoning district, or the other option would be to limit it primarily to our commercial and industrial districts. But as we understand, there are currently 15 bus benches in the city that have advertising signs on them, and staff would like to have an opportunity to inventory those so that we could report back to you whether any of those that exist already are within residential areas. So our thought on this item would be to have you again address any questions about the concept generally, any questions you particularly have about exceptions 8 and 9. We'd like to hear, we have a representative of OCCK here to comment on how exception 9 affects them and their operations. And then our thought would be to carry this over and continue the hearing to your October 1st meeting so that we could present to you the existing locations of the existing bench signs that are out there, so we don't take an action today and not know the full consequences of it. So we would like the decision made by the Planning Commission to be an informed decision. So with that, we've outlined the basic exceptions, and those would be that signs placed or authorized by the city, signs expressing the city's own governmental message, which might direct somebody to a city facility or to the River Festival or something of that nature. Exceptions 3 and 4 already exist today, which are signs that are limited to the C4 district. Neighborhood entry signs that are placed in the public right-of-way. We have a number of those presently that are subdivision entrance signs that are placed in a median in the middle of a right-of-way through a license agreement. We're working on a vertical banner program and a decorative flag program in the primarily in the business improvement district. And then we have the temporary signs in the right-of-way during election season and the advertising signs on bus benches. So those are the exceptions that we're looking to carve out, and we would be open to any questions on that. And then we would like to hear from representatives of OCCK about any comments or concerns they have about how Exception 9 might impact their operations. And then we also have the city attorney here if you have any questions about Exception number 8, about the election season signs.
Thank you, Mr. Andrew. Other questions? Ms. Griffin, are you speaking? I need you to come to the mic, please.
Okay.
And I need your name and address, please.
Name and
Your office address is fine.
Hi, Michelle Griffin, OCCK Transportation, 340 North Santa Fe. So we've kind of had some discussions about this with their office, kind of last minute this afternoon, kind of threw some things together. We do have a list of all of our stops that we can get to their office. We have 178 total stops in town. Right now, we have 76 benches throughout that are spread all over all 5 routes. We have 16 that do have signs on them right now. Our goal would be that all of those could have signs. And then in the future, we plan to add more benches and more shelters as we get additional funding for those things. So whatever decisions you all make, that we could take into account future plans as well.
And Section 9, your feeling on this?
I think we thought it was okay. I mean, we really just saw this afternoon, so that's kind of why we asked for some additional time so we could look at things a little bit closer. I think we're okay with it. I think just thinking about future planning for us would be important to make sure that those zoning restrictions don't inhibit us later.
And so I assume the subject of right-of-way was discussed, and the
Yes,
fact that
that's-
there are others that can't have signs in the same locations, and,
Yes.
I mean, there are reasons we've had these discussions.
Yeah, I think the primary concern that we would want to have an informed decision and also be able to create some maps for you showing the bus bench locations and all that. If we find that 50% of the bus benches are located abutting a residential zoning district, we want to be able to report that. We want OCCK to know that. So if there is a decision or recommendation made that would limit those to commercial industrial areas, that be a conscious, informed decision. And so we think the best thing to do is that we would like to work with OCCK between now and the 1st to produce some lists and maps so that we can be able to tell you of those bench locations, X number are located within residential districts, and that may influence your recommendation as to whether they should be limited to particular budding particular zoning districts or allowed in any zoning district in which they operate and have stops. So,
Certainly.
Yeah, and we're excited to see the map because I think that'll help with us with future planning as well,
Definitely.
so.
Definitely. Well, thank you very much.
I have
Do
a
you
question.
have
yeah.
questions?
Do you have certain criteria that you require of applicants for the benches?
They have to be a certain size. We do ask to know what's on those so we can approve those. That's really about the extent of it. We haven't had any problems with any inappropriate
Right.
things like that. Most of them are nonprofits that want to do those signs.
Okay, thanks.
Sure.
Any other questions? Thank you very much for
Welcome.
coming tonight.
so everybody feel comfortable with understanding that what our goal here has been is that we have a general prohibition and will maintain a general prohibition on putting signs in the public right-of-way, but there are certain types of signs that there's interest in the community and maybe in the public's interest to allow for. And so what we're trying to do is identify those exceptions that the Planning Commission and ultimately City Commission may feel are appropriate defensible exceptions, and then to get those identified in the code, which helps us when we have people coming in with ideas about putting vertical banners on utility poles and putting other types of signs. So we've kind of described it in the description of when is it okay and when is it not okay to have a sign that's located within the right-of-way. So,
Thank you. Are there questions regarding the Section 8 on political signs for Mr. Martin while he's here? We've discussed this for as long as I can remember, but if you still have questions, he's here.
we're going to discuss it again on the next item.
Oh,
but-
good.
So, he's saving
I
up
don't
for
remember when
that.
we didn't discuss it, so,
It's just that some of the blanks that are left there on this will be filled in based on what you recommend on the next item. So
okay.
So you want us to postpone
we
the
would like to
decision?
postpone the consideration of this text amendment to your October 1st and continue the public hearing to your October 1st meeting to allow us to work with OCCK to develop a list and map of the bus benches so you can see the implications of your decision and how it would affect their operation.
So moved.
Second.
And what is the date, I'm sorry?
Do I have that correct, Crystal? Yes. I thought the 30th
It
was
is.
Monday and the 1st was Tuesday.
But I'll let them decide so we don't have to hear it again.
Yeah, so it would be October 1st.
It's been moved and seconded to postpone item number 3.2 until our meeting on October 1st. All those in favor vote aye, please. Aye. Any
You
opposed?
have a motion and second.
Who was the second?
We had 2 seconds at
There
once.
was 2
but
seconds, yes.
Commissioner
You
Eisenhower.
can put Eisenhower.
Yeah.
All those in favor vote aye, please. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Which brings us to 3.3, Application Z 19-9, filed by the Salina City Planning Commission, requesting an amendment of Section 42508 of temporary signs, banner signs, and mobile signs to eliminate the numerical limit on the number of temporary signs that can be placed on a lot during election season, to eliminate the prohibition on the placement of temporary signs in the right-of-way during election season, and to amend Article 14 definitions by adding definitions for government sign and work of art.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The particular item that's being addressed here, again, is in response to legislation that was passed by the Kansas legislature in 2015. And in explanation or justification for our delayed response would be that most of the municipalities in Kansas were waiting for the legislature to go in and rework the language and to amend this statute, and there were a couple efforts made to initiate that, but it did not happen, and so the 2015 law stands as it is. And then there was a Kansas Attorney General opinion that Mr. Martin can get into in more detail, and that Kansas Attorney General opinion said that the legislation was constitutional, did not violate the First Amendment or the Reed versus Gilbert Supreme Court decision. And so in recognizing that, we felt that it was time to move forward with a text amendment that would bring the city into conformance with that state law. And so the idea is that last year, instead of doing an amendment, the city commission imposed a moratorium on enforcement of the right-of-way prohibition during election season. And rather than doing that every year, it seemed appropriate to consider a text amendment. And so you'll have to keep scrolling, John, so we can get to the, well, you went too far. Okay, so what the text is, and you won't, this was just, this option was just added, you won't find this in your report, so I'll refer you to the board. There is, it says, notwithstanding any other provision in this article, an unlimited number of temporary signs may be placed and displayed on private property or the unpaved public right-of-way for a city street in any zoning district for a period up to 45 days prior to an election involving candidates for a federal, state, or local election. And so as this would work in application, their definition of election season is the 45 days preceding an election. So one option for you to consider is that if you just allow it during the 45 days leading up to an election, and there was a primary election for a local, state, or federal election, that would mean that you could have signs in the right-of-way and an unlimited number of signs leading up to the primary election. Then when the primary election was over, you would have to remove those signs for a period until you got to 45 days before the general election. And in that case, then the exception would come back into place. So as a practical matter, are candidates or property owners going to take notice of that, and are they going to go out and are they going to leave those signs up, counting on the city not to enforce during that period? Are we prepared as a community to enforce that? If it happens, will then candidates petition the Planning Commission, the City Commission to change it so that the period between the primary election, which is in August, and the 45 days before the November election, which falls towards the end of September, that during that period you're not allowed to have the signs out there? So what Mr. Martin has done is provided some optional language there that you do not have in your packet, but you can see it identified as optional there. In the years during which primary election is held, any sign authorized under this subsection with respect to a primary election may continue to be placed and displayed during the period between the primary election and the immediately following November general election. In other words, I guess they would have the scenario, you've got signs out in the right-of-way in front of your property. August election occurs. Do we want to have happen and expect to have happen that those signs will be removed, and then until at a point where it's 45 days before the November election and then they're placed back out? Or is it okay in your minds and simpler in your minds to just allow those signs to remain until, and it, again, you as a property owner may not want them out there from July through November, but we also, candidates aren't likely to want to be responsible for going out and enforcing that themselves. So the two choices are, option A is you put out in July and August and remove, then put out again in the fall for the November election, or you put out the signs leading up to the August primary and leave them there till the election is held in November. So those are really the two options, and I might let Mr. Martin elaborate on that if I have described that correctly, so.
Well, before we get into that, the public property, that's going to inhibit maintenance of that area. How can they mow around all those signs? You know, like up and down 9th Street.
Well, they're not going to be allowed in Jerry Ivy Park or those types of things, and we don't have to allow them on the medians in Belmont or North 9th Street. We're talking about the right-of-way that's abutting somebody's property.
Rather than city property right away.
Right, but I'll let Mr. Martin elaborate on how he interprets that. But I interpret it that it's a right that accrues to the abutting property owner that abuts the right-of-way, but I'll let him
Sure.
elaborate
Good
on
afternoon,
that.
Commissioners. Commissioner Goffa, to your question, there's another provision in the city code, the property maintenance code, that imposes that mowing obligation for the abutting right-of-way on the private property owner. So if the private property owner chooses to allow signs in the right-of-way abutting their property, and that interferes with their mowing obligation, that is an issue that they have created and they will have to deal with. This provision and state law speaks in terms of allowing signs in the unpaved portion of the public right-of-way. So that would include the grassy parkway area, as it's commonly called, between the street and the sidewalk, generally is where that consists of. So that's my answer to that question. It certainly could interfere with maintenance, but in most cases, the property owner is responsible for maintaining that area anyway. There are exceptions, but most cases, the private property owner has that responsibility.
Well,
But as to the question of somebody who has no association with or it's not abutting their own property, is this going to allow a property owner to go out and put an unlimited number of signs in the South 9th Street medians, for example, when it does not abut their own property?
that's my question.
I see. We have included language which makes the answer to that no, and that is under subsection D1 there at the bottom of the screen. And it states that temporary signs shall only be placed and displayed by or with the permission of the owner or tenant. And so any person cannot go out and place signs throughout town unless they own the property that abuts that right-of-way. It will be the private property owner's decision whether to allow that or not. And to the point that Mr. Andrew was making regarding your options here, I think he did an excellent job explaining that. And the only other point I would make is that the primary objective here is to bring our code into compliance with state law. And to do that, we do not have to allow the signs to be displayed during that gap period, so to speak, which under the statute would end 2 days after the primary and start again 45 days prior to the general, which we're in right now. We're in that period, but the 45 days prior to the general election will commence on the 22nd, I believe, of September. So that's the period that's at issue. You don't have to do so under state law, but if for practical or other policy reasons you wish to create these rules so that they apply from 45 days prior to the primary all the way through the general, you could certainly do that, and that's what that optional language would accomplish.
And if we have the gap, who's out there patrolling this?
Well, theoretically, it would be the city code enforcement staff that would be enforcing that, and so.
Well, that would work as well as garage sale signs. So I don't understand why that gap would exist at all. It'd be entirely voluntary for homeowners. I mean, we could consider it voluntary, right? Because they're going to do what they want, unless we go around and pull them all out of the ground.
And you're probably talking 400 or 500 signs? Maybe more?
Well, after the primary, some of them will be eliminated.
But will the signs be eliminated? I was going to
I
ask
think,
that.
I think they're embarrassed enough.
Yeah.
You lose, I think you
Yeah.
want to.
You are correct from the standpoint, this is most likely to be enforced by the property owner who decides whether they want those signs to continue out there or not. The real question is, if you say you want there to be a gap, then you are basically sending the message that you expect city enforcement staff to do enforcement activity during that gap. And if you say you're not concerned about having a gap period where no signs are permitted, then you're saying that you don't expect city staff to go out and enforce during that period.
And that is my point. I think that would be a useless waste of time for staff. I see no purpose for that whatsoever. But having put those
We
signs in
wanted you
people's
to make an
yards.
informed decision and know that you had options. And so knowing what the implications were of each option.
So is there language in here that has to be adopted tonight?
Well,
Or can this be adopted as is?
The reason that's saying optional is if you say that you want a gap where the signs are removed between 2 days after the primary, then you would recommend that this be approved without the optional language. If you want that language that's in there that says during a year where there's a primary election, then the signs can be there from before the primary election all the way through to the following November general election, then you would say, you would make a recommendation to incorporate the optional language. Those would be the two choices, to either not incorporate the optional language or to incorporate the optional language.
Okay.
And we do have a relative sense of urgency with the 45-day period leading up to the general election commencing next week. Your approval today, if possible, will enable the city commission to consider this item and potentially approve it on Monday, which would coincide with the commencement of the 45-day period. And there are some additional rules here, if Mr. Berger scrolls down, that would apply then, including but not limited to size limitations on signs displayed in the right-of-way, and another requirement applicable to setbacks at intersections. So if you are able to do so, there is a benefit in approving the text amendment today so that it can advance.
I don't think we're going to try to hold it up. Takes it off the agenda, right?
It does.
Yes.
Good.
So, knowing that, thank you, Mr. Martin.
Thank you.
Is there any way to enforce the removal, just say in the primary, that they lose in the primary? Is there any way to enforce that they be removed? And should there be? I'm not,
I think they're good about removing.
are they? Okay.
I think that might be construed as content-based regulation because we'd have to read the sign to see whether it was subject to removal, so.
That is one feature. Whatever is approved here, just because we're doing this to accommodate the state election sign law, we're going to have to allow signs regardless of what message they contain. So the whole point is to accommodate election signs. That was the intent of the state legislature, we believe. But in order to stay constitutionally compliant, we know that we can't discriminate based on message. So it's an odd situation where to comply with state law and constitutional law, we have to do a couple of things, including not only allowing election signs, but allowing any sign on the same level.
Thank you. So, commissioners,
I'm good with it. Everybody else?
so we're not
I think it's-
adopting the additional language, right?
We are going to
Well,
add
we'll
the
adopt
optional.
it to-
We are.
Adopting the,
So,
The optional language.
yeah.
okay, so
If
that's the
if
motion
you
should
wish to
contain.
not have a gap and just allow the continuous display without intervening enforcement period, then you should make a motion to incorporate the optional language. If you want a gap between the periods where you expect city staff to be out enforcing, then you should recommend that the optional language not be included. But if you're comfortable, I just call it the gap option or the no gap option. The optional language would create no gap. It would just be a continuous period from primary. You have to remember also this year there was no primary, so we didn't have a primary period, so signage would be limited in those areas 45 days before the November election. You wouldn't have 2 periods. So it's only going to, the extra period's only going to come in play in years when there is a primary election.
But there's an example right there. We haven't entered that 45 days, and there's a lot of signs out. And technically,
Yeah,
that's...
it's not the display of the signs, it's the exception that allows them in the right-of-way.
Oh, they could be out,
They
but
could
just
be out
not in
on
the
private
right-of-way.
property now,
Got it.
but in order for them to be displayed in the unpaved right-of-way abutting your property in the right-of-way, they can only be done within that 45-day
days.
period.
Okay,
And that
yeah.
period hasn't started yet, so.
Well, I move that we adopt the optional language. How much more do I have to go on that?
To section 42.
To section 40, okay, I'm sorry.
Public.
Would you like to approach? Please do.
I thought she was gone.
I did too. She was behind the wall.
No. You're hiding.
Your name and address, please.
This is Joan Ratzlaff, Salina, and I do have a couple signs in my yard, not in the right-of-way.
Yes.
I had some questions and a comment, a couple of comments. First, I wanted to know if there's anything in this that would protect line of sight, and, like if there's anything that would restrict the size of the sign, because I'm thinking about being able to see not just line of sight at corners, but also pulling out of driveways. If you're in your car, and some people have a lower car than mine, which is not as tall as some. As it is, a tree or parked cars can make it hard to see traffic coming, or, people on bicycles or walking or whatever it might be. So that's a bit of a concern, and I'm hoping that this addresses that. So that's one thing, the line of sight, not just intersections. And I was also wanted to say I would prefer that there be a gap because of the clutter. And in spite of the fact that it may not be enforced, and I would expect it to not be enforced really, because we already have gobs of codes that aren't enforced on a proactive basis. I mean, you see violations of code all the time. They're everywhere. You can just go for a walk for a mile, half a mile, and there's several things. So, and the last and third thing is a question: would signs be prohibited on public right-of-way, such as in front of the library, for instance?
That was my question.
Mr. Andrew.
Yeah,
So-
we talked about medians, but I was wondering about
The
that
answer
other-
to those questions is
Thank you.
Section 3 there deals with the size limits on the size of the sign, so they cannot exceed 8 square feet in area. The item 4 there addresses the fact that, notwithstanding the fact that you can put a sign out in the unpaved right-of-way in front of your property, you can not do so in a way that obstructs sight lines or sight distance. So if somebody puts up a sign in the right-of-way on Ohio Street at a side street intersection, and people call and complain that they can't see vehicles on Ohio, and we go out and determines that it obstructs sight, then we can have that sign relocated so that it doesn't obstruct sight. So the legislation gives us that authority. As Mr. Martin explained, if you want to go back to carefully to 1, John. Okay, so you can only do it with the permission, either under the authority by where it's placed there, or with the permission of that abutting owner. So you could not put signs out in the right-of-way in front of the city-county building, or in front of the library, or in the right-of-way in front of Jerry Ivy Park, or in the medians on 9th Street, or Magnolia, or Belmont. It's conferring rights on a property owner. The whole genesis of this statute is, if you've driven in Wichita very much, they have a lot of subdivisions that have rear yard privacy fences and retaining walls. And there were individuals in Wichita that thought that prohibiting signs in the right-of-way was depriving those individuals of being able to express support for political candidates. So the people that wrote the statute thought that that was private property, and in fact wasn't private property, but the whole genesis for this statute was to allow people, say, similar to what the people that are back up to Schilling Road, that have privacy fences along Schilling Road, to allow them to place their signs out in the Schilling Road right-of-way abutting their property to show what candidates that they supported. Or the other example would be, there are properties on Sierra Drive that back up to Magnolia east of Ohio. There's right-of-way right behind those homes. This would give them the right to put signs out in the right-of-way behind their home on Magnolia to express their support for a candidate or for a viewpoint. So it was written to allow for that situation, and so it was not intended to just allow any public right-of-way or property to be open to those signs.
Do you have other questions?
Yes, thank you. I think what I'm looking for is clarification that that our government bodies, city, county, building authority, city commission, county commission, library, whoever, would not be allowed to give permission for those signs in the right-of-way abutting that public properity.
I'd have to
I don't see it
I'd have to
addressed here,
defer
but I
that
didn't read it
question
that-
to Mr. Martin. I imagine that most of the bylaws and all for the building authority would probably not permit that, but I can't say that this would this is not designed to prevent that. It's designed to have the property owner display the signs or give permission to display the signs. So if somebody wanted to do it on this block, they'd have to get permission from the building authority. I can't imagine that happening. Plus, this is a polling place, and it's illegal to place signs within so many feet of a polling place, so that would rule it out anyway.
Mr. Martin,
So
do you
this
have
is
any other
permissive
information on
rather
that?
than-
This is permissive.
Yes.
It's not designed to be restrictive.
Thank you.
I think,
don't really have anything to add, other than just emphasizing that, again, any sign displayed in the right-of-way must carry with it the permission of the abutting private owner. So there are properties in town that the city or the county own, and whether it's on their private property now or the right-of-way now, the government does have the ability to speak and display its own messages. It could do that now, and it always has had the ability. So this does not restrict the any particular party, namely a governmental actor, from displaying a political sign, but there are certain rules and laws that would likely come into play were that attempted. So in short, there's nothing in this code that prohibits that, but there are other laws that would potentially apply, and potentially policies that would apply to any government speaking on political or election matters.
thank you.
Thank you.
Just a personal anecdotal story relating to polling places. We had a situation where particular candidate parked a pickup truck with a political sign in the bed on 7th Street across from the city-county building, and I had to go out and measure, and I determined that the pickup truck was parked within 250 feet of a polling place, and I directed that the pickup truck be moved because state law prohibits placement of any political campaign signs within 250 feet of a polling place, and this is a polling place, so.
Thank you. Any
I'll
other
second the motion.
questions? Okay. It's been moved and seconded to approve application Z19-9 with the additional verbiage. All those in favor, vote aye, please. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. And that
Who was
brings
the seconder of that, Mr. Bass?
Mr. Baffa.
Okay.
Brings us to administrative items and our annual business meeting and election of officers.
With all the, yeah. So we're just gonna hand out, so you have a copy of our current roster and the current positions, but we have attached a staff report with this, and our only changeover was that Mr. Story's term expired, and the mayor appointed Joshua Gilmore to fill this vacancy, and Mr. Linkowitz was reappointed to a 3-year term, and Spencer Angel was reappointed as the youth member. Kate Brule no longer lives in the community. She's attending college at Kansas State University in Manhattan. Our first item of business is the election of a chair and vice chair, and Mr. Freiberger currently serves as chair. He has served 1 full term, is eligible for another term. With the exception of Mr. Gilmore, all current members of the commission are eligible for the position of chair. And Mr. Linkowitz served as your vice chair the past year. He is eligible for another term. And with the exception of Mr. Gilmore, all members are eligible for the position of vice chair. So, with that, we've got a listing there of individuals and when their various terms expire. And while Mr. Freiberger's term does not expire till next August, I think you had expressed some uncertainty about whether you would be able to complete your full term.
Yes, that, and you say I've served 1 term, but I've served 2 terms the time before that. So I think I've served my terms, both here and on the zoning board. So I am going to state that I'm not interested in being chairman or serving on the zoning board any longer. It has been quite a pleasure, but I've been doing it a long time. It's time for someone else to sit here. So that, and then I also am in a major expansion in my business, as you all know, so it's very hard for me now to commit to specific dates as we expand across western Kansas. I'm traveling a great deal of time. So that's my reason, not that I wouldn't continue to do it or I wouldn't want to. I just cannot commit to having near perfect attendance like I've had for 5 years. So that, I guess, we need a nomination, or?
Yeah, we would have you I will open the floor for nominations for the position of chair for the upcoming year. And again, because Mr. Gilmore has not served a full term, he is not eligible for that position, but anybody else currently on the board is eligible. And again, we wanted to qualify this, that any volunteer or nomination is subject to the mayor's making the final appointment, but we don't want to bring names to the mayor for people who are unable or unwilling to serve, so.
Precisely. So is there a nomination for chair?
I'd like to nominate Greg
Mr. Linkowitz?
chair and Mona as vice chair.
I'll second that.
Mr. Linkowitz? You would do us proud.
Well, My only concern is sometimes my work requires that I'm not here as often as I like, so that would be my only concern.
You've done very well getting here.
And pardon me, I'm lost my voice, so.
Well, was there a second?
I did, I seconded it.
You would accept it?
Yes, yeah, I would.
Commissioner Eisenhower?
Isn't there someone else who would like to take that on? No? Okay.
Scott?
Scott?
What?
How about
Vice
you?
Chair?
Vice Chair.
I'd be interested in
Ms. Eisenhower, I think that you would be worthy and a
And I-
great candidate, and you should accept this
Oh,
with
causes me
grace
stress.
and...
That causes me stress. Scott, you're it.
Oh, you've been fabulous so far. Think of the heights you
And
can
I appreciate
you
that.
can
No,
go to.
yes, I'm flattered and thank you.
Uh.
But Scott, I think you would be perfect. Perfect.
Well, we have a motion
Yes.
and a second, and upon approval, you'll accept.
Would you?
Yes, she will.
I would rather Scott be.
We know
be
you
the
would rather
VP.
that.
I guess who's going to make the motions if you're chair?
I do. Well, also true. Okay, good point. That's a good point.
But
Even if you make a
quick to-
nomination, it's still subject to the nomination
Thank
being
you.
accepted. So
Thank
you
you.
cannot,
well, I suppose we should
Force.
vote on it then, and then you can do as you choose.
Or you can amend your.
Because you know you can't say no to the
Should I rescind
chairman.
my motion?
Yeah, let's let somebody else do that.
All right, I rescind my motion.
Thank you, Dan.
Well, then we need a motion for chair and vice chair.
Let's just do the chair.
Yeah.
We need a
I
motion for
nominate
chair.
Greg
Lord.
Linkowitz.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Mr. Linkwitz. All those in favor vote aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? That motion carries.
Barb.
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 Would you like the gavel?
Barb.
Yes, would you do it?
Only because no one.
I had
Okay.
good.
Well,
I mean,
good.
It's not
Okay.
my first
Is that a
choice,
motion
but
from someone?
Honestly.
I'll make that motion.
A second? Mr. Lang? It's been moved and seconded to elect Ms. Good as vice chair of the commission. All those in,
The maker of that motion
was Mr. Baffa, and Mr. Lang had the second. All those in favor vote aye, please. Aye. Any opposed? Motion
Well,
carries.
only because.
Okay, now we need somebody for the zoning, the
Yeah, that will come
appeals.
next. That will come next,
We would-
Chair.
We have completed your officer slate, and so our second step would be representatives to serve on the Board of Zoning Appeals and the Heritage Commission. And obviously, we want people who are willing and able, so just for the benefit of our current members on a week like this, typical, it's not, they don't meet every month necessarily, but most months on a week like this. Mr. Freiberger is your current representative, and he would have this meeting today, and then he would come back on Thursday for the Board of Zoning Appeals. So there could very well be weeks like this where we have a Planning Commission meeting on the third Tuesday, followed by a Board of Zoning Appeals meeting on the third Thursday. And so the ordinance that created the Board of Zoning Appeals reserves a spot on the Board of Zoning Appeals for a Planning Commission member to encourage communication between the board and the Planning Commission.
I've done it for some time now, and it's a very important position because we're able to reinforce all of the things that we do here and talk about on a level that is instrumental, and that the people involved in those decisions have not been involved in our discussions. So I encourage someone to take this position that will be sure and communicate to that body what the vision is from the Planning Commission and what our consideration is, because I've often had to step up and speak in difference or in an opposite opinion to the group because they really don't know what we do. and don't follow it. It'd be great if there was more communication or they followed what we do, but they don't. So it's really an important position for an agenda that we want to see fulfilled, whether it's zoning, environmental, all the things that we talk about. Those are not issues that they deal with at that commission. But they are things that need to be taken into consideration in their decisions. So, do I have who would like, whoever will be suggested will then be approved by the mayor. So, is there someone that would like to do that role? Yeah, I'm particularly looking at you. Because I think that some of the things that you talk about, we meet once a month. Yes, if there's an agenda, which last year, there was back only 6 months out of the year, probably. But I guess it could be every month, but it hasn't been regularly.
When do they typically meet?
They meet at 4 o'clock on the third Thursday of the month, in this same room, at the same time that we do.
How about Greg? Would you be interested?
I think time commitment might be an issue for me on that. It's, like I said, running a business, and there's times where it's work to come in here. I mean, I love being here, but there's times where it's a stretch. I've got to move things around, and I think
Yeah, how about John Olson? He's not here, but
You mean,
he might.
who are the other members of this commission, of the commission?
Just John Olson.
Oh, the zoning board.
How about
Well,
Scott?
I
Scott?
can't list them all. Madison Miles, I'm sorry,
Abner's not on.
Abner is off now.
Cale Sharp,
Cale Sharp,
David Holmgren,
David, myself, and,
Fred Fanning.
yeah, Fred Fanning.
Scott, would you be interested?
I don't think I would be interested. I mean, my plans
I
are changing quickly,
don't-
so.
John Olson would be very, I think, good in that role because of his relationship with people in the community that have similar interest. But I can't speak for him. So,
You can put that name forward, and we can try to get confirmation from him that he would be willing to do that.
you're not interested?
I'd rather not.
Okay. Well, then I think it would be great to suggest John.
I could see.
I think he would enjoy that role, and I would feel that he, again, would carry forward some of our concerns in decision-making there.
Do we need a
Motion.
motion?
You can nominate it, you can make a motion to nominate it and second it, subject to his confirmation of his willingness to serve.
I recommend to the city commission that John Olson, subject to his acceptance, be appointed to the Board of Zoning Appeals, making that recommendation to the city commission.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that John Olson be recommended to the city commission and mayor for the role of liaison to the zoning board upon his confirmation of that. All those in favor vote aye, please. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Which leaves us with the Heritage Commission, which, Mr. Baffa, you serve on. Are you wanting to remain there?
Unless somebody else would want it, I enjoy it.
And it's another very important role. And you've done such a good job,
Yes.
or so I heard.
Okay.
Does he need to be nominated?
He would be nominated for the same kind of motion, recommend to the city commission that he be reappointed.
Then I so move.
I second it.
Thank you.
Yay.
It's been moved and seconded to recommend that Mr. Baffa be reappointed to the position as officer to zoning, or to Heritage Commission. All those in favor vote aye, please. Aye. Any opposed? That motion carries also. Well, that wraps up our election of officers. Congratulations.
Yes.
Mr. Lukowitz.
thank you.
Yes.
Do we have opportunity to discuss things, or we're adjourning?
What
right
were you
now?
wanting to discuss?
wanna
This is
know
about the
if there-
election of officers?
No.
Okay, then hold on just a moment, please.
The preliminary discussion
yeah,
items
we're-
is things that we want to bring forward from you as a staff to get your guidance or discussion on, that we have none of those for you, so.
Okay.
If we move to unfinished business
That
or
would be your
other
moment.
business, that would be appropriate time for commissioners to bring up other matters under other business.
Mr. Batha?
Okay, I'd just like to know if there's, when I was thinking about this in relation to our last meeting, if you've been in contact with any of the homeowners regarding the homeowners association?
I have had contact with one of the owners that appeared and spoke at the hearing to provide them with additional information, but it is the city, as Mr. Linkowitz so clearly pointed out, the city has no role or responsibility in any way, shape, or form as to their homeowners association. That's a private matter between lot buyers and the developer who did the initial development. So the whole point of homeowners associations is that they are a self-governing entity, and my job as a staff person has historically been in a case such as Highland Meadows Hamlet or Mariposa, where there is some improvement or some common area that is going to serve some public purpose. My job is to make sure that all the instruments are created and recorded and filed to create a entity, in most cases a homeowners association, to maintain those facilities. So in the case of Highland Meadows Hamlet, they have private streets. Those streets are owned and maintained by the homeowners and not by the city. So staff's job is to make sure that there's an entity created that's capable of taking care of those things. In the case of Mariposa, they own and maintain a very large stormwater detention pond that's adjacent to the golf course. That is their responsibility. In the case of Grand Prairie, there's no such, the streets are public, there's no common area of that sort. So whether they choose to or not choose to create a homeowners association is not a concern for city staff. And it's up to them to work with the developer to get that, but much of that discussion was bringing to this body dialogue that should be occurring between the developer and the lot buyers, and you really don't have a role in getting that set up. We had a case where in Golden Eagle Estates number 4, where my job was to make sure that articles of incorporation got filed, bylaws got filed, the homeowners association was legally formed and filed with the Secretary of State. I made sure all that happened. The homeowners association never met one time, never collected any dues, never held a meeting, never elected officers, didn't do any of that. City staff simply can't control that because it's up to the homeowners association to sustain themselves. So our focus has been on the things that do come within the city's purview and the planning commission's purview. So I'm attempting to set up a meeting with the applicant and the applicant's attorney so that we can package together the best information possible and make sure that all the parties, including owners in Grand Prairie, have access to the same information. But we're not going to city staff's not going to hold a public meeting to help them set up their homeowners association.
Are there other items?
The only other item staff has that's outstanding, and Dustin may have an update on this, but we are looking, and I don't know if is there a date involved where Lauren is looking to have a proclamation for planning month, or, okay, so we've done it both ways. October is National Planning Month. As part of National Planning Month, the Planning Commission has held its annual landscaping awards as part of the observation of National Planning Month. In the past, we've asked the Planning Commission chair to read a proclamation at the City Commission meeting declaring October to be National Planning Month. It doesn't have to be the chair. We could have others volunteer to do that, but we may be contacting you about having somebody present that proclamation. And then apparently we're really struggling to come up with nominations for landscaping awards, at least what I'm hearing from indirectly from the city forester or tree advisory board. So we've had Planning Commission suggest the Foley equipment property out on North Ohio. I don't know, Dustin, whether there's been any further discussion with the city forester about that, or? Okay. Do we know whether the tree advisory board has met or are going to meet and put forth a nomination? Okay, but we don't know what that is. One thing that the Planning Commission created that's a companion to the landscape awards was a curb appeal or improving curb appeal award. So if there's a project out there that comes to mind or that you've seen where a property owner has, and it could be a residential property where somebody has done some substantial things to improve the curb appeal and enhance a block or neighborhood, we would appreciate hearing those as well, and any suggestions you have for landscaping awards. Surprisingly, as wet of the year it was, actually the moisture encouraged more weeds than it did growth of some of the desirable stuff. So it's been a year where a lot of our commercial properties have struggled with maintenance, and so again, our award criteria has usually been based on the design, the implementation, but also on the ongoing maintenance of those landscape sites. So there's still time to put your nominations into us for projects you think are worthy. One I have thought of, and I would like planning commissioners to drive by and look. There was a former building that was a Jim's Pharmacy, Little Caesar's Pizza, among other things. It's now the Credit Union of America, and I think they have done a lot to that building to improve its curb appeal along Ohio Street. So if you'd be interested in driving by and looking at that, and if you agree with that, then that might be one that we would consider recognizing. So we do want you to drive around and send us a note or whatever of any project that you see that's worthy of recognition.
I think
Well, Exchange Bank, too. They moved out of the one you're talking about, and then that beautiful building they put up over there on Cloud would be something.
I had sent that in, did that not
Did you?
get? I did that, and the
We
yoga
were kind of
studio.
watching to see how it
Yeah.
because it was so new to make sure it was being maintained and all that, and it appears that it has been. So we'll we'll keep that on the list.
And the yoga studio
Right.
next
that-
to United Way.
The which?
The yoga studio next to United
Fourth and
Way.
Walnut.
And that was done on a voluntary basis, so that would be a good voluntary
It looks
project.
very nice. And,
Brian Richardson's, Ohio, and
we had talked about
Iron.
that.
And then the Norton apartments right there too, across the
Right.
street from Richardson's. That looks really nice too.
Actually, I've seen a lot of things lately. And then we talked about going back to people that we've already awarded it to, because it continues to thrive,
Right.
like Chick-fil-A, which just gets better.
Right.
I don't know what they do, but I need them.
I've sure noticed the houses on Iron Street between Ohio and downtown have really improved too.
I have too, yeah.
And I don't know if the street drove that or if it was, the Joneses next door that did it. But
But if
I've seen that happen in other communities where one house
Yep.
worked and then, the neighbors started, it was
Yeah.
a snowball effect.
Well, that's the idea about one property going and improving. Curb appeal can sometimes influence others to do something similar. So if you see one of those residences by address and you want to identify one that you think has improved the curb appeal on that block of Iron, then please give us the address and we'll identify the owner and who did that. But we want, it's your opportunity to recognize things that are improving the built environment and the streetscape of our city. So anything you see and you want to send it to us, let us know. We're going to try to do those awards on the 15th of October.
And conversely, if you see a property that's in decline, like if the paint is peeling, if 50% of the paint is gone, surely there's an ordinance that compels the homeowner to,
We have a property maintenance code and we have a property maintenance. The way our property maintenance code is enforced is we have one inspector that works south of Crawford and one that works north of Crawford. And so if there are properties that you want to report, you can call those into the office and the code enforcement officer can go out and look at that.
Is there other business?
No other business other than we will meet on the 1st and does the 2:30 time work as a start for a study session, or would you prefer us to start it at 3?
How far did we get through today?
Got about 2/3 through.
Then 3 o'clock
Okay.
for the continuation, and the subject was,
The role and responsibility of the planning commission and a refresher on the city's ethics policy for boards and commissions. So
I've heard it several times. Which brings us to our public forum. Do you have anything to say? No? You always bring such fresh information. Oh, that's good. With that, Mr. Linkwitz, you may ask for a motion for adjournment as the chairman.
Do we have a motion for adjournment?
I'll second that. I'll second that. Sorry, Mr. Lang, I got you.
It's been motioned and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye. Thank goodness. Thank you, everybody.
Yes.
Yeah, 6:27. Okay.